Hi, my name's Tesarski. I'm really glad that you've joined us for this video series, ESG Acronym to Action. It's the companion video series to the book that I've just written, ESG from Acronym to Action, Making World Change with Planned Intention. So that's what we want to do. We want to talk about ESG, and we want to talk about it in terms of turning an acronym that many people have heard of, but many people probably don't understand. We want to turn that acronym into action so that we can make world change with intention. Why even discuss ESG? What's the point? What does it mean? Well, it means environment, social, and governance action by individuals, communities, corporations, and organizations to change the way that we think about these things. It's becoming more and more prevalent in our society based on the fact that there's such a proliferation of information on the social media networks that information's out there, people can get to it, they can start to think more about these things and form an opinion about what it means to be concerned about the environment and social issues in our communities. And so in the book, I get a bit humorous there where I'm saying everybody's rushing out to IKEA to buy the sustainably sourced, non-conflict wood desks, vegan leather chairs, and all that's fine. And obviously those are some little steps that can be taken, but a lot of times what we find, and we want to dispel here in this video series, is that we think about these things in terms of a sort of an immediate reaction that often can create a bit of a novelty instead of seeing ESG as a necessity for what we need to do in terms of operating our companies and our organizations and communities as we move forward. So what is ESG? Well, as we said, ESG is a corporate operating model which values the environment, social action, and corporate governance as being as important, if not more important, to the bottom line of companies and operations, even more so than profitability. So let's take a look at some numbers here. So over the last few years, as I've said, ESG has become more and more important. One of the main things that we're seeing is that in ESG, now investment firms, investment banks, funds, fund managers are starting to take ESG quite seriously. So when we look at some of these numbers, here's roughly 62% of issuer respondents on the markets are now monitoring their ESG ratings. Now that's up from 45.2% in 2017. That's a pretty significant increase, almost 20%. And we see in the S&P 500, which is always a great barometer of the business community. And there we see that obviously there's been a huge increase in sustainability reporting, 86%. Another main thing is about assets under management. Often when we talk about different funds and fund managers, we talk about how much assets they have under management. And you can see here a huge increase year over year from 2018 to 2019. We went from about a $50 billion increase in these funds. That's a huge, huge increase. And it tells us that ESG is a super important part of running our businesses. To 325 billion, that's probably the one that stands out the most to me, is the total issue of green, social, and sustainability bonds. Often even communities are utilizing bonds as an investment vehicle. And so we see that in 2018, it was 201.8 billion. In 2019, it's 325 billion. That's 125 billion, roughly, year over year. That's a huge increase in the issuance of green and social sustainability bonds. So right there you can see that, is it important to the bottom line? Absolutely. investors and investment banks and fund traders are seeing that this is now becoming something that's critically important. The reporting of ESG markers and successes, and also not necessarily the failures, but where companies need to improve, is now becoming a key factor in where people are going to put their money in terms of investments and who they're trusting with those investment dollars. I've identified in the concept of ESG 4 pillars which make it a little bit easier to begin to think about our response to ESG. And so the first one is identification. And it's identification of core concerns that you may have regarding these issues of ESG in your company or in your organization. And you need to take the time to isolate those and reflect on them. Reflect on the primary issues as they pertain to your organization. That's critically important. We need to take that time, and often what happens is in companies and organizations, we're very reactive, and so we don't necessarily think through the whole process. So what's important is that we identify the issues and we don't just throw things out, don't just put band-aids on the solution. What we look to do is provide a long-term strategy and integrate that. That's critically important. Now, the second thing is information. And information gathering, and I have already talked about the proliferation of social media and information hitting us on a second-by-second basis. It's not even a day-by-day basis, so things are coming at us so fast. And so gathering information is absolutely critical. Why? Well, because we need to educate ourselves on the issues, so we need to work with internal stakeholders and our team to develop our strategy in and around ESG, and we have to create an atmosphere and environment where this becomes very important. But more importantly, we also have to make sure that external stakeholders, our communities and shareholders and different levels of government are also in tune and in line with those ways of thinking in terms of ESG. That becomes very critical. And I'll use the oil and gas industry as an example. Canada is a very positive place in terms of oil and gas. Do we have areas we need to improve in? We absolutely do. I've been in the industry since 1983, and I've seen the exponential change that's happened in terms of the extraction of natural resources in Canada. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the environment section, but right there we have some of the issues, because Canada does a great job, but we don't necessarily do a great job in gathering the real information and presenting it in a nonpartisan way to our communities to allow them to see the work that we do and the opportunities that can be created. People need to understand that. That doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to agree with us. But in the end, if we can present an educated viewpoint that's backed up by solid information, that's a real opportunity for us to create change. Next is integration. Now, integration means you must take ownership of your organization's response to these issues. And when you mitigate those issues and you optimize your operations, that's when you can truly see that your team either has buy-in or they do not into the integration of your response to ESG. And it is absolutely fundamental and critical that your team, your company, your organization at all levels has buy-in to this very, very important part of the ESG strategy. Why? Well, that's because as you integrate your strategy and your response and you think about it thoughtfully and you create a response to ESG, it becomes part of your corporate DNA. Now, I've been looking at my ancestry.ca these days, and I found out I had in my DNA some relatives in the Aegean Islands. Who knew? I had no idea that that was a part of my DNA structure. And we talk about that in terms of us being human beings and individuals. DNA is such a critical component of who we are. Well, it can also become a critical component, actually must become a critical component of our corporations and organizations. It needs to be imprinted on us and all of those people that form our team. And finally, we have implementation. That's when you put the elements of your ESG strategy in place and you begin to make that operational. And that becomes not just the theory and the principles and the practice and philosophy, but when you begin to incorporate that and implement it into your operational structure, that's a huge, huge step forward as a company or as an organization. But it takes everybody following the plan, the integration of it, and turning that into the new reality, like I said, of your corporate DNA. When that occurs, then you realize that it's truly imprinted on your organization. And that's when positive change can be happening, and you can see the tangible results of that in your company and in your community at large. So we've talked about ESG. What is it, and why do we need to even discuss it? Is it just another acronym? No, it's not. ESG is something that's critically important. You've seen the bottom line numbers here. And so what we need to do now is talk about how are we going to incorporate each of these areas, environment, social, governance, into our corporate DNA. And that's what we're going to do in these next videos. I'm Chris Tesarski, and I look forward to joining you on our next video about the environment, the E in ESG. It's going to be a great series, and I'm looking forward to presenting it to you.